Hello, welcome back. There's no denying it, Elton John has never been afraid to speak his mind. Over the decades, the Rocket Man has built a reputation not just for his flamboyant stage presence, glittering glasses, and timeless music, but also for his honesty. He's never pretended to like something just because it's popular. He's never sugar-coated his opinions for the sake of the press. And that, more than anything, has made him one of the most fascinating voices in rock history. Behind the sequins and the sunglasses, Elton has always been brutally candid, even about some of the biggest names in the business. In his early career, as he was rising from a struggling songwriter at DJM Records to one of the biggest solo acts on the planet, Elton crossed paths with dozens of legendary bands. Some he loved, others not so much. In this documentary, we'll explore 7 major bands Elton John admits he hated early on, and how his views on them evolved over the years. Because if there's one thing you can count on with Elton John, it's that his opinions, like his outfits, are never boring. So, let's go back in time, to the wild, experimental, unpredictable world of the late 60s and 70s, when Elton John was still trying to make a name for himself. 1. Led Zeppelin. In the late 1960s, Led Zeppelin were the biggest, loudest, and most mysterious band in the world. They were everything rock and roll had become: raw, heavy, and dangerous. And for a young Elton John, who was still searching for his own sound, Zeppelin represented something he couldn't quite connect with. Elton once admitted in conversation that, early on, he didn't get Zeppelin at all. To him, their music felt chaotic, more noise than melody. He grew up idolizing artists like Ray Charles and the Beatles, whose songs had structure, emotion, and storytelling. But Zeppelin's heavy, almost primal energy just wasn't his world. When Elton first heard Whole Lotta Love in 1969, he thought it sounded like a train wreck of guitar solos. He appreciated Jimmy Page's talent, sure, everyone did, but it wasn't the kind of musicianship he related to. He was a piano man. He wrote songs about heartbreak, not about Vikings, lust, or the occult. And yet, over time, something changed. By the mid-70s, Elton couldn't escape Zeppelin's influence. They dominated the charts, and even he began to admire their command of the stage. Eventually, he even became friends with Robert Plant, admitting years later that they were phenomenal live, just unstoppable. But in those early years, Elton John hated them. Too loud, too macho, too far removed from the elegance he admired in songwriting. Still, like many of the artists on this list, that early dislike turned into genuine respect. 2. The Rolling Stones. Now, this one might surprise you. The Rolling Stones were the embodiment of cool, rebellion, attitude, danger. But to Elton John, they weren't cool at all. In the early 1970s, when Elton was taking over the charts with songs like Your Song and Tiny Dancer, the Stones were already rock legends. But Elton didn't buy into the myth. He thought the band sounded, as he once put it, stale. He respected Mick Jagger as a frontman, but he didn't love the music. Elton wanted innovation. He was drawn to the theatrical, the emotional, the melodic, and to him, the Rolling Stones' blues-based rock felt repetitive. He even said that some of their live shows were a bit tired, harsh words in an era when most people called the Stones the greatest rock band alive. And yet, just like with Zeppelin, Elton's attitude mellowed. By the time the Stones released Some Girls in 1978, he admitted the band had found new energy. He even became friendly with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, though that friendship had plenty of ups and downs. At one point in the 80s, Elton called Mick Jagger a bit of a show-off, to which Mick famously replied, "Takes one to know one." 2 icons, both masters of the stage, both aware of their own egos, and both too stubborn to back down. Number 3. The Beach Boys. Now here's a twist. One of America's most beloved bands, and one Elton John couldn't stand at first. When the Beach Boys exploded in the early 60s, Elton was still Reginald Dwight, a shy teenager in England, obsessed with R&B and soul music. The Beach Boys' cheerful harmonies and California Sunshine anthems couldn't have felt more foreign to him. He once said, "They were too clean, too perfect, it didn't feel real." Elton loved grit, voices that cracked, lyrics that hurt, songs that told a story. The Beach Boys, in his mind, sounded like they were selling Coca-Cola. He didn't hate them as people, he just didn't take their music seriously. But that all changed when he heard Pet Sounds. Brian Wilson's masterpiece completely flipped Elton's perspective. He later said, "Pet Sounds changed everything for me. I realized how beautiful and emotional pop could be. So yes, early on, Elton John hated the Beach Boys. But he grew to call Brian Wilson one of the greatest composers who ever lived. That's Elton in a nutshell. Brutally honest at first, but never afraid to admit when he's wrong. 4. The Eagles. When the Eagles first emerged in the early 1970s, blending country rock with harmonies and polished songwriting, Elton didn't buy the hype. He saw them as too safe. To Elton, music needed to take risks, to surprise people, to break rules. The Eagles, at least at first, sounded to him like background music for a road trip. He respected their craftsmanship, but he didn't feel their soul. They were clean-cut, radio-friendly, and, in Elton's eyes, lacked danger. But there's another layer here. Behind the scenes, Elton and the Eagles had a bit of rivalry. They were both topping the charts, both selling out arenas, and both competing for the same audience. Elton once joked that Hotel California wasn't exactly a toe tapper. The Eagles, in turn, weren't too fond of Elton's flamboyance. Don Henley reportedly called his stage outfits ridiculous. Years later, though, the tension faded. Elton came to appreciate their meticulous songwriting and Glenn Frey's vision. In interviews, he's called Desperado a brilliant piece of work. But back in the day? Yeah, he hated them. 5. Kiss. If there was one band Elton John truly didn't understand in the 1970s, it was Kiss. The makeup, the costumes, the fire-breathing, blood-spitting theatrics. Elton wasn't impressed. He thought it was all gimmick and no music. When Rock and Roll All Night hit the airwaves, Elton reportedly said, "They look like comic book villains pretending to play rock and roll." He wasn't wrong. That was sort of the point. But for Elton, who spent years honing his piano skills and writing intricate songs with Bernie Taupin, Kiss's shock rock approach felt shallow. Ironically, Kiss cited Elton John as one of their influences. Gene Simmons has said he was inspired by Elton's stage presence and confidence. Over time, Elton softened his stance. He came to respect their showmanship, even if he still thought the songs were a bit simple. He once laughed and said, "At least they made people smile. That's something." But in the 1970s, Elton John hated Kiss. To him, they were all flash and no feeling. 6. The Sex Pistols. In the late 1970s, punk was the sound of rebellion. It was raw, loud, and furious, everything the glittery, well-produced pop world wasn't. And for Elton John, that was a problem. He hated it. When the Sex Pistols burst onto the scene in 1976, tearing apart everything that came before them, Elton John, who was at the height of his fame, saw it as an attack on the kind of music he loved. They mocked stars like him as dinosaurs. They called his generation irrelevant, and Elton wasn't amused. He dismissed them as a bunch of kids who can't play their instruments. He thought punk was more attitude than artistry. And in a sense, he was right. That was the point. But here's what's fascinating. Years later, Elton admitted that punk did have a point. It was raw honesty, the same honesty he always valued. He grew to appreciate the movement for shaking things up. But in the moment, back then in 1977, he absolutely hated the Sex Pistols. He thought they were a joke, an angry, noisy rebellion with no real heart. 7. Queen. And now we come to the most shocking name on this list. Because yes, once upon a time, Elton John hated Queen. Not because of the music, but because of the competition. When Queen rose to fame in the early 70s, Elton John was already one of the biggest artists in the world. He saw Freddie Mercury's theatrical style, the costumes, the piano, the drama, and thought, "Oh great, another me." He admitted later that he was jealous. He felt threatened. He saw Queen as rivals who might steal his spotlight. In the beginning, he didn't even want to listen to them. He thought Freddie was overdoing it, too flamboyant, too showy. He once joked, "There's only room for one piano diva in rock and roll, and that's me." But that rivalry turned into one of the most beautiful friendships in rock history. By the 1980s, Elton and Freddie were inseparable. They shared gifts, jokes, and mutual respect. Freddie even sent Elton a Christmas gift shortly before his death, signed "Love" from Sharon to Reg, their private nicknames for each other. Elton later called Freddie the bravest man I ever met. So yes, early on, Elton John may have hated Queen. But by the end, he loved them more than almost anyone else. Outro. So what do all these stories tell us? Elton John's early dislike for these bands wasn't really about hatred, it was about honesty. He spoke his mind. He said what he felt. And when his opinions changed, he had the humility to admit it. In a world where most stars stay quiet to protect their image, Elton John always chose the truth, even when it wasn't flattering. He hated Led Zeppelin's noise until he understood its power. He dismissed the Beach Boys until Pet Sounds changed his life. He mocked Queen until Freddie Mercury became his dearest friend. That's the magic of Elton John. He's not just an icon, he's human. He's proud, flawed, emotional, and brutally honest. And maybe that's why his music still connects with people today, because underneath the glitter and glam, Elton John has always been real. Thanks for watching.